All righty. Good evening. Good evening. Um, hey, Mr. Jacobs, welcome to Pathfinders. And for our viewing audience, welcome to Pathfinders. I greatly appreciate this opportunity. We are here this evening for the purpose of just having a conversation about the careers that we typically don't hear about. The premise of Pathfinders, and Mr. Jacobs, you may not be fully apprised of what I do is each month I try to profile a career that our young people don't typically get exposed to. And I try to introduce them to individuals that are in those careers so that they have the opportunity to see themselves in those roles. As we have looked at the current situation in our society, we find it necessary to kind of shift our focus and turn our attention to what we're calling a justice series, where we're finding individuals that have a direct impact on the criminal justice system and bringing those individuals in so that our young kids can see and be inspired by those individuals, and therefore decide that when they become an adult, they'd like to be the person that's in that position of influence to have a positive impact on the justice system. So tonight we have with us Mr. Rodney Jacobs. He is the City of Miami's Assistant Director for the investigative panel for the City of Miami. So, Mr. Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us. And what I really just wanted to do is if you have any opening words, feel free, and then I'll just go ahead and begin the interview process with you.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. Obviously, it seems pretty dynamic, and I'm happy really just to contribute some of my life journey and career path to hopefully help others and obviously be available for questions too. So, with that, let's just dig in.
Okay. So tell me specifically about the career. You're the assistant director for the civilian investigative panel. What exactly does that entail, and what does it mean for a kid that's never heard of this before?
Yeah, so essentially, my work is civilian oversight of the City of Miami Police Department. So essentially, I help run an office that investigates police that are involved in misconduct. The people in my office work to gather evidence and information about complaints against police, and they provide those findings of fact to a panel that makes recommendations for police discipline. In my capacity, obviously, I help with the investigations and conduct the more sensitive investigations. And outside of that, the more administrative nature of what we do here as well. So no days like the last, and it's always moving to new different directions. And in some ways, we influence policy on a departmental level as well, ensuring that police officers are kind of in line with best practices. But we also like to think that we work well with our community members too to help bolster an idea of trust between community and police, and really look at how we can reform policing to be more in line with safety in our communities.
Okay. So how did you come across this venture? Because until recently, very few people were aware that investigative panels even existed. So what was your path to getting there?
Yeah, completely honest, this job kind of found me. So I graduated law school in 2015, and from there, I joined the United States Army Reserve. So took about a year or two for training for that. And as I got out of training, or a couple months before I got out, I was looking for work. Obviously, my Army Reserve work would just be kind of on the weekends. So I was looking for a full-time job. I hadn't yet sat for the bar. So I was looking to kind of utilize my law degree in ways that were somewhat unconventional. So I reached out to the judge who I clerked for in Ohio and some other people, and they said, "Hey, there's this gig out here in civilian oversight. You probably never heard of it, but I think you'd be really good at it, and you really be interested. So take a look at it, tell me what you think, and see where it goes." So my first time visiting Miami actually was just to interview for this job. My director essentially pulled me out of law school and said, "Hey, I'm going to be looking to retire in a couple of years, and you seem to be smart enough, energetic enough, and have some charisma to kind of do this work. It's important work. A lot of people in this field have been doing oversight for multitudes of years, come from very prestigious schools, and have done just great work in the community around policing for years. So I felt in some ways fortunate, blessed and honored to kind of be mentioned in some of those same circles. So I decided, hey, this looks like something that at very least is interesting, and it will allow me to give back to the community in ways that I didn't think were possible.
Mm. Okay, that's fascinating. So, as you have found yourself in this position, that would then obviously imply that it is a funded position. How does the funding structure work for this investigative panel?
Yeah, so we're considered a city department, much like sanitation or AR or the police department for that matter. We are a city department. We receive our funding from the city budget, and obviously the budget is, created via taxes. So that's how we maintain and gather our funding.
Okay, so really any city could decide that they were going to fund this entity, and it just runs from there.
Absolutely. And in fact, cities are considering it. I'm working right now very closely with a coalition of people that are trying to institute this on the county level as well. And it will, in many ways, receive the same level of funding. So, as you stated, any county, city, you name it, and there's multiple boards like this around the nation that do this kind of work that are looking towards that kind of implementation.
Okay. Is it a difficult process to begin a panel? Or is there is it an arduous process, or is it a simple thing to do by referendum?
Just like anything else, it has its difficulties. Obviously, people don't necessarily like their change or their cheese moves, so therefore they're somewhat reluctant to change. But I think if you have the right people doing the right things, usually you will have the right outcomes that come from that. So there are
Right.
some obstacles for civilian oversight to get instituted, but with a little bit of work ethic and perseverance, it can be done, and we're
Okay.
seeing that.
Okay. Typically, how many people serve on the panel?
It depends, right? So there's different models across the nation. In the city of Miami, we have 13 people, which allows for 2 people to be appointed from each city district, as well as an appointment by the police chief and the mayor. So that's how our models work, is set up. But other locations do it differently. It
Okay.
really determinative on how your city commissioner or city council is set up. And in some locations, they just have a couple people, maybe 4 or 5. So.
Okay. All right. So we know that the civilian investigative panel is important on its face, just to make sure that in any case that officers are doing their jobs correctly and that there aren't any abuses. But is there a legitimate need for reforms in the criminal justice system in general?
Oh, most definitely. The ACLU came out with a report last year, or maybe 2 years ago at this point, really trying to unpack the idea between disparities in the criminal justice system, not only from arrests, but all the way towards the courts as well. So what we've seen over the last, 5 to 10 years even, is the necessary need for criminal justice reform, whether it be in the courts or the prison. Obviously, my idea of reform looks at policing. I believe that if you can stop a bad arrest, you don't necessarily get to the recidivism rates of prison systems or the disparities within the judicial process when we talk about plea bargaining and prosecuting people. So there's a lot of different nuances in the criminal justice system that are in need of reform. And so with that in mind, I thought this was um, the podium that I wanted to speak at, because I felt as though it was really the beginning stages of the issue. And if we could kind of solve bad policing in America, we could thereby solve a lot of our criminal justice issues as well.
Perfect, perfect. Can you give me a little bit more about how your office has directly impacted policing in your area? Reforms that you've recommended and things that really stuck and made an impact?
Oh, most definitely. So one of the great things that our office is tasked with is reviewing departmental orders, which are like your standing operating procedures. Right now in the news, everyone is talking about what happened to George Floyd in that chokehold incident and pitting his knee on George's neck. Those are practices that our panel has spoken about before, and we were able to kind of get out of doing here in the City of Miami Police Department. And I think that was in large part due to our work and efforts here at the CIP. Also, the institution of body-worn cameras. We were a large proponent of that and worked instrumentally with the police department in devising a policy that would ensure that not only we had body-worn cameras, but that those cameras stayed on during their interactions with the community. So we always are each and every month going over departmental orders and policies to make sure that police departments are really doing the best practices and industry standards and up with the best technology to ensure people are being safe in their communities. Obviously, the very nature of what we do is investigations. So if a police officer has multiple uses of force or there's a litany of complaints in their record, we make sure that those people are held accountable so that, we couldn't maybe not necessarily stop the first incident of misconduct, but we work very hard to ensure that incidents of misconduct do not continue to perpetuate. So we looked at those patterns of practices, and we try our best to get police officers to reform on those patterns that we see.
So, as a point of clarification, if a civilian panel is operating properly, then you're able to have an influence and an impact on how the police departments operate and reduce the incidences of unjust practices to everyone in the community.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So when I know you mentioned that you kind of came across this, and we have other kids on the line that are trying to learn about these different careers, and it's always important for them to talk about the funding opportunities. So, what is the income range for people that serve on the panel?
So you're breaking up a little bit. So you're saying what is
Okay,
the range for? Can you say that again?
the income range.
Okay. Yeah. So my office manages and operates a $1.7 million budget. So the income range can vary depending on your experience and expertise. I myself, obviously, I came in with military experience, and I have 4 degrees, 2 masters, and a law degree. So that necessitated a different kind of band for me, but it varies. We have people in our office that are making well over $100,000, and we have some
Okay,
that are making 50 to 60,000 as well. So
okay.
it's one of those situations where, just like any other job, it's all about how you are an asset, and obviously using that or leveraging it to get what you deserve insofar as income.
Okay. So if you're looking at a range of anywhere from 50 to 100,000 plus, that is a range in which people can take care of their families.
Most definitely, most definitely.
Right, right. Okay. So what are the qualifications to be eligible for this position?
Well, obviously, one would need some background in investigations in some way. Obviously, on the executive level, you're looking at more years' experience managing a staff and kind of doing this work on a day in and day out basis. So a lot of those things are incumbent upon that. I think entry level, obviously, when we were hiring, we looked for people that had some experience in policing as well as a college degree. So those are some things you can expect when kind of looking into doing this kind of work. Myself, as well as my director, we both have law degrees as well. So that adds to our ability to really peel back the layers on some of this, because a lot of it's legal in nature. When we talk about Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, police department practices, Supreme Court rulings, and things like that, I rely on my legal education every day. So.
Okay. What are some things that you would you recommend everyone that is trying to be on a civilian investigative panel to pursue a law degree, or are there other levels of education or other types of education that you would recommend for people that wanted to have this sort of position?
Yeah, no, so I think a legal education opens up a multiplicity of doors, even in this sector. Or if you want to use it to something else, obviously one could be a lawyer, one can go into policy. There's just so many opportunities with a law degree. We would be here all day trying to name them all.
Right.
Other people in this industry have, master's degrees in public administration or public policy, some of which have, even masters in business administration. So something obviously in the social sciences would be beneficial because a
Okay.
lot of what we do is governmental in nature,
Gotcha.
but also in criminal justice as well. So, it's really about how you can utilize your experiences to speak to this issue that I think is important.
Okay. Okay.
Investigative
That's
journalism as well. There's people here that have journalism degrees that were investigative reporters for a while, and they do well in investigating police officers involved in misconduct. So
okay.
I think it's important here not to kind of just box anyone into any certain situation. It's just about just leveraging your resources well to fit the job criteria.
Okay, that's perfect. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think it is important that our students are aware that there are a wide variety of things that they can do, still circle back to this a service to the community, because that's essentially what you're doing, is providing a service. You're just compensated for that service. And so I appreciate the work that you are doing, most certainly. So if a student wanted to ensure that regardless of their degree, that they were one that could qualify for a position on an investigative panel, what recommendations would you have for them? So if I'm a middle schooler and I say, you know what, one day I want to be on an investigative panel, what are the skills that they should begin developing from now so that they can
Yeah.
qualify for this position in the future?
Listen, I think if you're in middle school, the best thing you can do right now is just develop your critical thinking skills. When
Mhm.
I went into undergrad, I majored in philosophy and political science. Obviously, not necessarily with the intentions of doing what I do now, but going to law school. I think the best thing anyone could do in their formative years is to think critically and ask why as much as possible, to
Right,
really build up your curiosity to why the world works. For me, I ended up attending law school not because I had this great passion to be a lawyer. It was more so the idea that, listen, if life is a game, every game has rules, and in
right,
order to change the game, you need to change the rules. And to me, those rules were the rule of law. So I understood at a very young age that law is the thing that kind of governs our society in a way that makes things either fair or unfair. So I wanted to have a part in making what those rules were, so life could be easier for people. So with that bigger concept in mind, I just started thinking critically about how these things kind of fit together, and just kind of as I learned more about myself and my own individual identity, I just kind of look to other mentors, people like yourself, Christopher, that kind of guided me on my path and looked at my resume and kind of gave me a nudge here and there, and next thing I know, look up and I am where I am. So
right.
none of these things kind of happened with Rodney by himself. It took a village. And in fact, I call my close friends my board of directors, because they help me gauge my large life decisions. And I think it's
Right.
about really surrounding yourself with that group of people that will help you gauge not only your personal but career endeavors as well.
Right. And you bring up an excellent point, and it's a part of why I do Pathfinders. Is I just coming up, you are trying to decide what it is that you should do with your life, and you want to do something that is meaningful. And I think it's important that we introduce our students to things that are meaningful and beneficial to the community. And so when I hear you talk about your board of directors, like that's really exciting to me to know that you were really focused and intent on doing things that provided value. And also I think when we look at how a lot of us used to choose careers, it was just, well, what did the people around us do? And we weren't thoroughly exposed to other options. So we do this program to expose our kids to say, there are so many things that you can do to provide yourself an income and a way of life. And not only that, but then you can turn around and have an impact on something that we're concerned about. A child right now who's hearing about the different situations with George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks, well, they may not feel like they can do anything about it now, but they can make a decision also right now to say, when I become an adult, I'm going to position myself so that I could do something about that if it ever occurred again. So that's great, and I'm really glad that you came along this path and were able to be an example for our kids
Most
today.
definitely.
Yeah. So, and as you mentioned, critical thinking, I think that's an important part of the conversation as well,
Yeah.
because this is actually the second straight time that I've had a, a panelist to say that critical thinking is that skill that you should be developing. And what I'm finding is, obviously, I'm an educator, and we find that that's not the most prevalent thing that's taught in the traditional curriculum.
Yeah.
And we're learning now that as we go back and we look at our history books, not everything is necessarily accurate. They may have left some things out. A lot of people learned about the Tulsa riots over the last couple of weeks. So there are a lot of things that because we weren't trained to think critically, we didn't say, why isn't this there? Why isn't that there? And I think it's huge that you mentioned that critical thinking. So kids that are on the line, you certainly need to ensure that you are identifying ways to respectfully question things. Is that information valid? Can I find that information in a second source? And then you make your decisions from there. So Rodney, going back to your career, what would you say is the most rewarding part of your career?
Um, my career is still kind of early on. I've been out of school now for roughly 3 years. I graduated law school in 2015. But I would say the most rewarding part is just really being a change agent. Um, there's so much about our world, at least on a governmental side, that's slow moving. It's the check and balance, the nuance, the political posturing. You see change coming, but you're still so far away.
Mhm.
But in the work that I do, I can almost see change immediately. When a police department order comes onto my desk and they say, "Hey, Rodney, we're looking for revisions so that we can make this policy the best it can be. What do you suggest?" And I suggest, "Hey, I don't know if this is a policy we want to go towards because of X, Y, and Z, or this is good because of X, Y, and Z." You immediately have effect on police that operate and patrol on the day to day.
Right, right.
And I see the same, obviously, in the military as well. As an officer in the United States Army, I have responsibility in some cases over a platoon of soldiers, and I just feel like in so many ways you pour into their lives, and they do within this leadership capacity. That's real change, and a lot of people in our communities, they mostly kind of just look at it from, oh, I want to be an elected official, or I want to be a celebrity or something like that. And I think those have its place. I don't want to dissuade anyone from that because I think it's good. Um, but you also can have substantial change on the local level as well. And I think that's the place where a lot of us have opportunity to kind of really dig into and use our hard work in good ways where we can see um, change immediately. Whether it's, putting a street light on your corner or filling in a pothole in your sidewalk. You can be the change you want to see fairly simply. You just got to know how to navigate the system at place to get those things more effectively.
Absolutely. And I think as you mentioned, the change that you want to see, it's even as adults, I teach a course. I instruct parents on how to uh, kind of step up as a parent leader in the society. And as to how dependent on adults or the constituents the government really is, and that we really are a part of the process of informing what policies go into place. We are, if we want a street light, we should expect to be able to get a street light because it's our tax dollars that are paying for whatever is being paid for. And these are things that as kids, we hadn't heard of that at all. So I think it's important that we begin to educate our communities and our children in particular as to the power that we hold as constituents within a particular city, or and just so that we grow up feeling like we have ownership over the areas that we live in, and then we can choose our careers that will give us even more influence in our cities. And I think that's just a huge thing. So I'm really glad that you were able to point that out.
Most definitely.
I also brought you on as the first speaker in our justice series because I know that you are very well versed with regards to the entire process. And so, what are some other careers that you would think that a student who would like to have an impact on the criminal justice system or just have a positive benefit for our constituents should consider as we move forward and look at other careers in this series?
Yeah, I mean, so there's so many careers. Obviously, just looking at it from top to bottom, a similar position in mind would be like an inspector general, who does auditing over all city employees and investigations, depending upon the law there. Obviously, you have attorneys, you have judges, you have clerks that work within the courts, that help set the agenda and ensure that certain regulations are adhered to. You have not only court clerks, but you have county clerks that do something similar, but on the municipal level. for municipal regulations and elections and things of that nature. Um, you have obviously in the policing aspect, you have police and bailiffs, um, and then obviously you have attorneys, both prosecutors and public defenders, and civil attorneys that work in the private sector. So there's so many opportunities within the umbrella of criminal justice that really the sky is just the beginning. So I encourage everyone to look at those career fields and figure out, just make a list. See what you're interested in. Do a little bit more research. I remember, going into high school, and my mom and my dad, was like, hey, start thinking about your career, see what you want to do. And I wrote down just ridiculous stuff in the legal field, like, oh, I want to be a firm associate. I didn't even know what it meant at the moment.
Right.
So I think it's just important to kind of massage that understanding. I remember my first semester in undergrad. While I was on campus that fall semester, I interned at the parole and probation office just to kind of see what that even looked like. And I got a great experience there in a small, more rural town about how probation and parole is either skewed, helpful, or unhelpful. So I think a lot of those experiences, when you write them down, you can gauge with better precision what to look at. And I think it's really helpful, especially in your early stages of your career, to figure out what you don't like. And that will help you better gauge what you do like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned something that I've heard a few times, internships. How much do you weigh internships in the process of identifying what it is that you do and do not want to do as a career?
Oh, it's critical. It's paramount. I was doing internships, from 8th grade until I graduated law school.
Really?
Internships and externships. Yeah, every summer I was doing something. Obviously I played sports in college as well. I played football on a scholarship, and but I still knew my education was important. So every summer, no matter where it was, or no matter where I was going, I was doing something legally oriented to kind of figure out what I don't like.
Wow.
I worked with the EEOC. I worked, like I said, in probation. I worked with the state attorney in New York City, the attorney general. I worked in chambers with a judge on the federal level. And I had all these experiences on my resume, and it really allowed me to kind of get this role. I mean, as you don't see many people at my age, or kind of with no experience in oversight as an assistant director. That just doesn't really happen. And I think what made me, I guess, more of an asset was because of those internships experiences I had.
Right.
So you definitely don't take those for granted and lead into those opportunities.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And like I said, that's something that I'm hearing more recently from individuals, but it wasn't necessarily something that was widely known when I was younger, at least. And we were primarily just said, get good grades, get a good test score, and everything else will take care of itself. But now we're learning that there's a whole other world that's opened up through internships. And so I'm glad that you were able to point that out.
Mhm.
So I greatly appreciate all this insight that you brought so far. So what I'd like to do is give people a couple of opportunities if they'd like to ask any questions. So those of you that are on the line, or if anybody in the comments would like to ask a question for Mr. Jacobs, you have this opportunity to do so. I'm going to check and see how we're doing on a live session to see if there's any questions there. So if you have a question, go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask your question. All right, I got a comment from a former student, and she says that this is so good. So she's very appreciative of this information. So as we get ready to wrap it up, because I know you have other meetings, there was one other thing that I wanted you to touch on. We had spoken previously, and you mentioned the idea of the healthcare system being a untapped source of information for the disparities that we're facing. Can you briefly touch on that? And then I know you got to go, so I don't want to hold you up, but can you briefly touch on those insights?
Yeah, no, for sure. So, one of my masters is in public health, and I do believe that the healthcare system is one of our most underused professions in trying to combat criminal justice issues. There's so much that happens in hospital emergency rooms that kind of people take for granted. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to a doctor or a nurse that has had a patient come into their ER room battered and bruised because of police officer misconduct. And I say to them kind of crudely, why didn't you report this? Why did you believe that your patient just tripped over his own 2 feet?
Right.
And if we could kind of track those things as a public health epidemic, it would really help us. And similar to gun control, if someone gets shot, more than likely they're going to the emergency room. We can kind of track via location where are the real harms of gun issues in our communities by just looking at who goes to the emergency room and what addresses they come from. So there's so many different things on the public health spectrum that we can look at, from police officers and mental health and officer wellness, to those that are not necessarily, to those that aren't going, to those that don't have good relationships with police officers in those misconduct situations. So I think the public health section has a lot to say in regards to criminal justice reform and police reform. And I hope that within that intersection of goods, we could look at how we built a more resilient city from healthcare than we have in the past.
Right. So that means even for those that want to go into the medical field, but still want to have an impact on our communities, they can go ahead and become the head of a hospital and then decide that they're going to contribute to how data is gathered and how data is shared to make sure that there are no disparities amongst those that are coming into the system.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Outstanding. When you first mentioned it, I was like, wow, that's so insightful. So I just wanted to make sure that our kids heard that directly from you. But as I said, I didn't want to hold you all night. I know I called you off one meeting, and I'm sure you probably have something else lined up to
About
get
3
into.
more left. Yeah.
Exactly. So I greatly appreciate you, Mr. Jacobs. We are going to continue this series on July 10th, which is a Friday, and we'll have a police officer with the city of Pembroke Pines. And then from there, we're going to be looking at a public defender. We're going to be pursuing judges and and different people that are part of the system who can educate our kids. So if you have anybody else that you think we should consider, then by all means, please reach out to me so we can get them scheduled and get our kids exposed to this information. So with that, again, Rodney, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you so much for your time. Again, we'll get back together on Friday, July 10th. And so with that, I bid you all a great evening. Rodney, you have any last words you'd like to say?
Hey, no, just feel free to use me as a resource. If you need me, you got my number.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Take care.
All right, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, Mr. J.
Bye-bye.